Right. Well, first thing that I want to say is that in terms of the left, we shouldn't worship scientists. I think in terms of looking back in history, we can think about the use of biology to justify racism and eugenics. People like Francis Dalton, I think he was Darwin's cousin, Paul Broca, went around collecting skulls, and this was meant to prove that Europeans were superior to Africans and definitely superior to Australian Aborigines. And of course, Germans and Anglo-Saxons were superior to other Europeans. Of course, we can't forget the abomination of Lysenko in the Soviet Union, basically the denial of genetics, the insistence on some sort of neo-Lamarckian acquired characteristics. In physics, I'm thinking of, much further back, but the assumption of a fixed universe after God has sent the solar system moving, everything remains static. On that sort of score, I can remember, from my sort of vague memories in childhood of contemporary science, a guy called Fred Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang, but in a pejorative sense. When he heard the idea of other physicists coming out with the idea that the universe is constantly expanding and began with some sort of singularity, what was it, about 13.5 billion years ago, he dismissed it with the term, that's cooey, that's like Genesis, that's claiming that the universe began with, yes, a big bang. Anthropology, of course, begins as a colonialist, academic discipline with people like James Fraser, Bronislaw Malachowski, Polish, British anthropologist, who were basically trying to equip, they might not have stated this openly, British colonial officials with an ability to administer those that they were meant to be administering. But of course, there was also another agenda that's worthwhile noting, and that is the attempt to discredit, to disprove, to dismiss the ideas of Lewis Henry Morgan, and of course, Frederick Engels. The whole marriage question, that in so-called primitive communism, you didn't have, how should you put it, a man-woman nuclear family. On the contrary, he claimed that was natural and everlasting. Now, of course, we on the left could have answered such claims by turning to the texts of Frederick Engels and Marx that are answer to the so-called scientific racism would be defined somewhere in a Marxist program where it talks about the fight for the equality of human beings. Our reply to the physicist could have been, well, matter is constantly moving. There's no such thing as a steady state. The anthropologists, we could have quoted them, Frederick Engels's origin of the family, private property, and the state. And I could go on, and I'm not against, looking at our tradition, looking at what the founders of what we call scientific socialism, historical materialism, Marxism, call it whatever you will. I'm all in favor of studying those works, but these claims are actually best answered when we actually go to the best science. So I'm sort of reminded that when it came to skull sizes and IQ tests, the work of Stephen Jay Gould and his wonderful book, The Mismeasure of Man, where he showed that the selection of the skulls was either consciously or unconsciously, who knows, biased. So when they wanted to look at Australian Aborigines, they deliberately chose smaller skulls. When it came to Germans and the Anglo-Saxons, they deliberately went for bigger ones. In the same way that when it came to the expanding, the constantly changing universe that we live in, you've got physicists like Martin Ryle, and when it comes to anthropology, you've got the field work of Marshall Salins. I think he came out with the original idea or the original concept of abundance, so-called original abundance. In other words, he actually went out there to look at hunter-gatherers and said, far from it being a desperate struggle for survival, it was quite the opposite. That they lived in conditions of abundance, worked very little, played, for a long, long time with the children, and basically had a very good life. And of course, that sort of work has been carried on and taken to a higher level by comrades such as Camilla Power and Chris Knight and the Radical Anthropology group. So what I'm arguing is, as well as us, studying the classics of Marxism, it's also important to equip ourselves with the best science. And indeed, I think that's where the best of Marxism actually lies. So when it comes to the climate, of course, we can look back at the penetrating remarks of Karl Marx himself in Capital, about capitalism treating nature as a free gift and abusing it. We can look at statements from Marx and Engels about capitalism and other societies creating deserts. But in terms of the actual climate, as far as I know, other than talking about the immediate smogs around industrial cities such as Manchester, this is a new thing. And as far as I understand it, the first voices when it comes to, hey, something's going on with the climate and it looks like human activity is a real factor here, I think goes back to the 1950s. I could be wrong there, but if it does, this wasn't, how should I put it, many voices. This was very few voices. Yes, you had books such as Silent Spring, which showed us or made popular the damage that modern agriculture was doing to birds, and it should also be added in insects. But the advantage of science is that it's testable, it's verifiable, and it's constantly open to question. So we're not talking about a doctrine. What we're talking about here is the scientific method of putting forward a proposition, putting forward facts, and putting forward facts in a way that are falsifiable. Okay, so what's the basic proposition here? The basic proposition is that runaway, not climate change, but the danger of runaway climate change is here, that human beings are the decisive factor here, not sunspots, not, naturally occurring El Niños, human activity. And in my view, what we're dealing with now is something that should be regarded as a scientific truth. along the lines of evolution, as mapped out by Darwin and added to in terms of genetics, added to in terms of punctuated equilibrium by Stephen Jay Gould. I think we're dealing with a scientific truth along the same lines as continental drift and the Big Bang. And I would add COVID-19. I don't view any of them as a conspiracy. Of course, all science, even good science, can be used by reactionaries. Nevertheless, it's open to question, it's testable, it's verifiable. And to me, that's the key question. So the basic proposition is what the data shows is that with the development of industrial capitalism, in particular wood burning and then coal burning and then oil and gas burning capitalism and industry, that what we've got, yes, is the danger of reaching some sort of tipping point and runaway global warming. And I should add in to that, and I'm not going to forget it, and that's also the question of industrialized agriculture, in particular animals, in particular cattle for milk and meat. Okay, so we've just had the publication. When was it? It was a few days ago, August the 9th, by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, two things need to be emphasized about the IPCC, and that is, first of all, it's a UN institution, it's intergovernmental, and what it involves is 195 governments who overlook the text that has been produced originally by 200 scientists. So this tends to be not the most wild prediction, not necessarily the most accurate predictions. What it is, it's the acceptable projections. It's the acceptable warnings that governments are prepared to sign up to. So you get a process of negotiation between the scientists on the one hand with their formulations and government officials on the other. So we shouldn't view their report, in my opinion, as sort of crazy eco talk. We should view it actually as the opposite, that this is politically toned down, and it's the scientists, on the other hand, the most that they can get away with. That's my reading of it. So, okay, so what does this August the 9th, 6th report that they've produced, what does it say? Well, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it. I've chosen simply one of the dates that they've marked out, and that's 2050. Why 2050? Well, basically, because I had to choose some date, and maybe with a bit of luck, I'll be around in 2050 to actually see what actually turned out to be the case. Well, okay, so what they're saying in this report is that from 1850 to 1900, since this period of industrialization, what we've seen is a 1.1 degree centigrade increase over the pre-industrial period. So what we now have is a situation of where it's the warmest it's been for some considerable time, and we're talking about tens of thousands of years. The figure I've got in front of me is 125,000 years. Of course, in geological terms, we've only relatively recently emerged from an ice age. Nonetheless, that's a pretty startling figure. And of course, the warning is that if global warming continues as they claim it's happened, since 1850, most definitively since 1900, then we get up to temperatures over the pre-industrial average by something like 3%. It could be between 2.5 and 4%. And what they're saying is that the most moderate increase is between 2.1 and 3.5 degrees centigrade. Now, if that happens, what the prediction is, and they claim that their predictions over the years have been improved in terms of their modeling, in terms of their observation of the weather. Their prediction is that droughts will increase, heat will increase, and rainfall will increase. So you have the warning that what used to be a once in 50 years expectation becomes almost the new normal. So what used to happen once every 50 years, they're predicting would happen every 3 to 4 years. And also what they're saying is, even if governments put in place measures that they agreed in Paris to attempt to limit the increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, for the next 2,000 years, they're saying that you would see the continuation of the melting of glaciers and, most crucially, the ice caps in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And of course, what that means, and I'm sure comrades, have just seen the pictures in terms of the globe. I've seen ones in terms of London. What happens under those circumstances? Well, what we're talking about is, with 1.5 degree centigrade increase, not from now, but from pre-industrial times, is what you'd see is a rise in sea levels by 2 to 3 meters. So what does that mean? Well, I've looked up, what are the 10 most endangered cities, and as you might expect, there's Dhaka, there's Lagos, there's Houston, Texas, there's Miami, and the list just goes on and on. And as I said, if you look at London, okay, this is without, obviously, the Thames barrier being improved and new defences put in place. What you're talking about is parts of central London like Chelsea, like Pimlico, inundated on a regular basis. And if the temperature goes up and they don't limit it to 1.5 and it goes up to 2 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels, then the prediction is that the sea level will rise by 6 meters. And I haven't looked at what cities go under those circumstances. Suffice to say, an awful lot of cities would go under, and an awful lot of agricultural land would also go the same way. And of course, from a Marxist point of view, and that's something not because climate scientists have been studying Engels's Dialectics of Nature, although I'm sure some of them have looked at that particular book. The danger is that what we reach is a situation of where quantity gives way to quality. And what you have is the existing climate system tip into another climate system. If you look at the world that we now live in, it has its basic climate because at the bottom, I'm saying bottom in a very English sort of way, so forgive me, but at the bottom of the planet, I know it doesn't really have a bottom, but at the bottom of the planet in Antarctica, you've got a continent, and that provides very good conditions for, how should I put it, basically storing water, yeah. And in the same way, if you take the Arctic, although it's not based on land, what you've got is a continental arrangement with North America and then Asia, basically surrounding this sea. And again, that's a very good, of course, entirely accidental arrangement to actually freeze water, which allows more land, but it also allows for the particular climate system, and that does include, yes, regular ice ages. And I'm not going to go there, except to say that a recent study that's come out of Potsdam University reports the weakening of the flow of the Gulf Stream. And of course, what the Gulf Stream is, I was taught this at junior school, it's what keeps Britain as Britain. So the Gulf Stream begins in the Gulf of Mexico, and warm air goes up the Atlantic towards Europe, and it hits Britain. I can always remember going to some garden, I can't remember what it is, but somewhere in the west of Scotland, and there are eucalyptus trees. And why has it got eucalyptus trees on a same sort of latitude as Labrador and Siberia? It's the Gulf Stream. So the Gulf Stream brings us, our moderate climate. Now, I'm not in a position to say if the Gulf Stream gets switched off, would this result in a new ice age? I think the answer to that is no. What it results in is bloody awful winters in Britain and basically in Western Europe. Either way, the point is there that such events could happen. Precisely this Potsdam study, whether it's right or wrong, again, can be tested, in terms of observing heats and looking at patterns and making more and more accurate predictions. But the point is, and this is the real point of the argument, is that thus far governments have not yet acted in any decisive fashion. So when it comes to, Boris Johnson, he made the point, didn't he? You could say it was politically unfortunate, politically unwise, that Britain made a head start in terms of dealing with the climate with Mrs. Thatcher. Now, Mrs. Thatcher's conversion to the idea of climate change was pretty brief and pretty fast, and it had nothing to do with her war on the pit communities, which was political. It was designed to break the power of the NUM because the NUM was the most organized and most militant of the trade unions, which had humiliated the Tory government, much to my memory and great pleasure as a young man, twice, 1972 and 1974, when Ted Heath then went to the country and said, who rules? Is it the unions or is it me? And the electorate said, it's not you. The Tories never forgot that and never forgave that. And as part of their offensive, against the working class, of course, targeted and took their joy in breaking the NUM. So if we look at what measures they put in place thus far, although you've seen some sort of transition in Britain away from coal power, that's absolutely the case, and some sort of transition towards wind and solar power, that's undeniable. So on certain days of the year, if it's very sunny and very windy, the government will issue figures saying 70% of Britain's energy today has been generated by renewables. Nevertheless, what we have is still a continued reliance on gas. Coal hasn't entirely disappeared. What coal we've got, I think, is mainly imported, but it's gas and it's oil and nuclear. Let's not forget nuclear. Okay, so we still have a situation where there are what I'll call denialists. So if you went to the web, you can find people who will say that the whole climate idea is a Chinese plot. It's a Chinese plot. Didn't you hear this from Donald Trump? It's a Chinese plot to do down America. So while America goes in for this crazy stuff about stop drilling for oil and stop digging for coal, China will carry on opening up its new coal-powered power stations, and will use that as an opportunity to catch up and overtake the United States. Others make the third world the culprit. All these subsidy junkies can't run a decent economy themselves. So what they're looking for is some sort of story about climate change to be given subsidies so that they can invest huge amounts of American and European money, supposedly on climate amelioration measures. And I suppose the story goes that then these various kleptocrats actually use that money in a corrupt way and channel it into the money markets of New York and London. We also have some on the left that claim that this is some sort of green eco plot that in order to make their dreams come true, that you've got this idea of climate change being invented by government, by scientists. Either way, one presumes that the Tory government has been infiltrated by these crazy people, and the whole scientific community has bought into it, either because they're fools or cynics, or because government simply is prepared to pay the money. And we know as scientists, it's very difficult to get grants. And if you put in a bid on some subjects, you won't get any money. But if you put in another bid, you'll get stack loads. There are others still on the left. We know in terms of the Weekly Worker, our friend Dave Douglas, I presume he's still a member of what counts as the NUM. But for him, the whole climate change question is a plot against coal. And if only the left woke up to this, they would oppose this nonsense. At the same time, you actually then get the same people saying, well, climate change is natural. And I readily say that that's correct. All you need to do is, open up an O-level, giving my age away, geology book, go out and look at rocks. And here we are in, southeast of England, with chalk. What's chalk made of? Bits of animals that died under, shallow, warm waters. All of that's undeniable. But the question that we're actually facing now isn't change over geological time, which maybe we could discuss later. What we're talking about is change happening in an incredibly short period of time because of human action. In other words, this is something that human beings have caused, but it's also something human beings can act to ameliorate. So at the same time, someone like Dave Douglas will say, well, okay, maybe climate change is happening, but if you put into place carbon capture, that would do the job. Well, yeah, except the cost. The cost is just prohibitive. And of course, what you actually get with our friend Dave Douglas, I don't know why, one presumes it's a sort of, how should I put it, a form of political nostalgia. Is it because, he enjoyed working in the mines? I expect so, because there would have been a great deal of camaraderie. And of course, he's got nostalgia for the power of the NUM, and sort of hopes just about that, if there was a revival of the deep mining industry in Britain, somehow that power would be restored. So I don't think that you're dealing with a politically coherent narrative here. I think you're dealing with clutching at straws. And I think that's why the term, denialism, fits with Donald Trump, with Bellassano, with Farage, with our friend Dave Douglas. Now, big business, of course, used to be solidly denialist. It used to be like, I don't know what the tobacco companies are like now, but they did spend millions and millions and millions in precisely getting scientists to prostitute themselves to tell us that smoking cigarettes was perfectly healthy. There was no direct link between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. Now, of course, all scientists, all decent scientists will include in their conclusions room for doubt. No scientist will say, this is absolute truth, we're absolutely certain, because they're scientists. And of course, within that, you get the anti, smoking causes always linked to scientists saying, well, you can't prove the link. In other words, statistically, smokers and getting cancer, there's some sort of correlation, but there's other life factors potentially involved here. Either way, the point I'm making is there, and you used to get that with the big oil corporations, that they used to spend millions and millions and millions on PR firms and scientists coming out with oil is vital, which it is under our economy, and in terms of climate, they would say, well, there's room for doubt, and precisely what about sunspots? What about natural climate change produced by volcanoes? And you could carry on and on down the list. But my basic argument is that, at least from my point of view, I'm not a climate scientist. I mean, all I can do is look at the best evidence and say, well, we should act on the basis of the best evidence. And certainly as a younger man, I used to be a smoker for a few years. I listened to the prostituted scientists who were paid for by tobacco companies. I listened to the other scientists and said, well, sod that, I'm giving up tobacco. I think that was a sensible idea. I didn't give up because of money. I gave up for my health. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe, like in Woody Allen's film Sleeper, maybe in the future they'll say, oh, you stupid people trying to ban smoking, don't you know it's good for you? But I doubt that. To me, the link is established. Anyone who smokes, I would advise them to stop. I'm not going to get preachy about it. Anyway, I think the same applies to climate scientists. As I said, I think that what we're dealing with is a scientifically established truth. Now, that's, as I say, never 100%, but I basically take it along, as I said before, with continental drift. And what you've got, of course, going on with corporations now is in general no longer a pushback against what I'm calling a scientific truth. What you've got is the attempt to use the phrase to greenwash their companies. And I can certainly remember, and it wasn't that long ago, was it, when BP, British Petroleum, and under Sir John Brown, now Lord Brown, rebranded British Petroleum fantastically as Beyond Petroleum. And I can't remember what, did they just have a BP symbol? And he remarketed it as some sort of sunburst, some sort of a sunflower logo. And the idea was that we know that oil and gas are bad for the climate, but we are transitioning. We are looking as a company for life beyond petroleum, and we are investing in all sorts of green technology. And of course, you've got that with supermarkets, you know, your washing up liquid, your soap, your clothes, your car, all of it's kind to the planet. And one of the, to me, one of the most absurd ones is precisely, you know, Elon Musk and electric cars. It's true that when they're running in, you know, I don't know exactly what, but, you know, we can just take it for the argument's sake that when a Tesla car is running up the M1, it's carbon neutral. But the production of its tires, the production of its body, the production of, you know, all the computer chips and all the other gizmos that go into a car, the electricity that is needed to power this car, all of that sees the emission of CO2, because we haven't yet gone over to a renewable energy sources, and I include within that category, although I'm not going to discuss it particularly, nuclear. The point is there, that the idea that electric cars are good for the planet is an example of greenwashing along the same lines as Sir John, Lord Brown and BP. There's hardly a company, hardly a big company I can think of that hasn't got their greenwashing department and their green advertising. So who knows what the COP26 will decide up in Glasgow. I think we'll see an awful lot of, you know, preening and boasting from Boris Johnson, an awful lot of pledges being made and attempts to, you know, bend the arm of China, lecturing China and India, that it's all very well you saying that we've been emitting CO2, you know, in vast quantities since 1850. And we've, you know, we in the West have made the biggest contribution to global warming. But they will be saying, if you want to avoid these sea level rises, which will affect you, that's undoubtedly true, you too have to commit to the same sort of time frame as us. And we saw in China with the last 5-year plan, basically China putting into place various dates that it would meet various targets. But meanwhile, what you had is the plan to build more coal, and I think oil, but certainly coal powered power stations. So there'll be a lot of lecturing going on in terms of China because of the size of its economy, because it's the world's largest producer, and I think presumably it must be now, surely, the world's biggest producer of CO2 gas. But India has also got an enormous population with a rising industry. But there will also be attempts to bend the arm of Brazil and Australia and other such semi-denialist countries. But the question I'm sort of posing and trying myself to think about is will it go beyond sort of electorally expedient dates that are safely in the future, that it ain't going to matter that much? Is it going to go beyond, electric cars and really electric delivery fleets? Will it go beyond, still more, and not against it, but still more wind farms and solar panels? Will it involve something decisive? That's the question. And I think that is questionable. Now, I'm not ruling anything in or anything out. And I think those on the left that simply say that capitalism cannot deliver because it's predicated on production for the sake of production, accumulation for the sake of accumulation. And I think that's true. Very famous passage in Marx. What's the point of being in business if you aren't making a profit? What's the point of being in business if each year your business got smaller and smaller? You're going to be outcompeted. You're going to be taken over by someone whose business is getting bigger and bigger. That's the nature of capitalism. So I accept that from the left. But the idea that the capitalist class and crucially capitalist governments can't do anything, I want to question. Okay, so this over the last week or so, I've been listening to various news items marking the is it the anniversary? Anyway, marking the agreement in 1987 to ban or to run down the production of CFCs, carbon fluoro something or others. These were the chemicals used in fridges to cool fridges. And what NASA scientists had shown with their satellites is that a hole in the ozone layer had opened up and was growing. And they warned that if you don't do something to stop it, then the ozone layer will thin out further and the hole in the ozone layer will get bigger. And what that means is that the sun's ultraviolet rays will be hitting you, and therefore instances, for example, of skin cancer will skyrocket. Now, governments did get together, and I'm sure CFCs are still being produced here or there. Nonetheless, they did get together. They did make their agreement, and they enforced it sufficiently to actually make a difference. So, if NASA scientists now do compare and contrast, if you look at 1987, there's the ozone layer, it's thicker. There's the hole in the ozone layer, and it's closing, or it's closed. I don't know which. Either way, it's had a visible effect. But of course, if you take the banning of CFCs, that was a relatively easy thing to do. Scientists, being clever people, soon came up with alternatives. And as I said, governments, because they could see the sense of it, and because it didn't involve any serious disruption, imposed the legislation, and it was successful. Okay, can they do the same thing for the climate? Well, it's worthwhile looking when it comes to this climate question, not only at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and climate scientists. It's also worth looking at maybe some people would think an unusual source, and that's the Pentagon, the US Defense department. What's their view? Well, they take global warming as a reality. And they say that the American military must adapt to it. So they're saying we need different aircraft, we need different tanks, we need provisions in terms of troop deployment. You know, you can actually read their report down to considerable detail, but they're also expecting, because of climate change and the sort of consequences that I've touched upon, for example, rising sea levels, you know, much more frequent occurrence of fires, of flooding, of how should we put it? People not being able to live or function in certain parts of the world. So what they're saying, I think, should be treated seriously, because I think the point about capitalism is precisely that although they haven't acted, or although it hasn't acted yet, I think because they actually live on the same planet as the rest of us and rely on the same planet as the rest of us, Elon Musk and his plans to head off to Mars aside, I think they will act. And I've put forward the idea, just as it is just an idea, not a prediction, but the idea of some sort of climate socialism. Now, what I mean by climate socialism in this context is really drawing on the experience of capitalist governments in the two great world wars, i.e. World War I and World War II, and the word that I'm using, of course, is borrowed from the war socialism of the German High Command. And this was put in place because in 1916, Germany hadn't won its blitzkrieg and put France out of action, and won its blitzkrieg against Russia and put Russia out of action. And instead, what it got involved in, as its generals feared before the outbreak of World War I, they'd got engaged in a protracted war. And with Russia on one side and France and Britain on the other, the German High Command thought that it faced defeat. And so they start coming up with offers of peace, but they also reorganize the economy, and they subordinate the economy to war production. So women are drafted into the factories. We get basically the suspension of the law of value in favor of the needs of the military. Hence, Germany can survive until the end of 1918. Russia's fallen out, but of course, America, with its huge productive ability, comes in, and not only do they send men, they send vast resources, as they'd been doing actually, of course, even before they formally entered the war. And World War II gives us a similar picture, and the best example actually isn't Germany, it's Britain. And what you get in Britain is Churchill running the foreign war, and it's the Labour Party with Attlee and Labour ministers Bevin, former head of the TNG, Transport Union, running the home front. And they agree no strike deals with the trade unions. But what they're able to do is militarize the population, I think, to the highest degree of any power in World War II, more than Russia, more than Germany, more than America, more than Japan. Now, of course, this is also relying on American subsidies and an agreement to concede hegemony. But Britain is relying on its empire, relying on its allies to mobilize, to militarize its economy. So effectively, you've got the government running transport, the docks, the aircraft industry, and one can go down deep into the economy. So could they be capable of doing something like that? Well, I think the Pentagon could, but could the Pentagon do it on a global scale? And I think there we get precisely into the problem. I can't see how they can get China to agree to the Pentagon's plans, because we not only have a situation where capitalism involves competition between company and company, but also the competition between state and state. And although the state can come in and temporarily suspend the law of value within a particular national economy, can they do that across the globe? It's at least questionable. Who knows? Okay, now again, just to underline the point, if they do, if there's an agreement, not in Glasgow, but precisely as the reality of rapid climate change becomes, more and more evident as cities are inundated, as various parts of the world become uninhabitable, as agricultural patterns are forced to change, as we get into, a refugee crisis, the likes of which, in terms of Afghanistan is nothing. The more, I think, at least elements of the capitalist class, and certainly the state, will find itself compelled to act. And of course, although I'm using this word socialism, I'm using it in the German or the British World War II sense, and I'm not using it in the sense that this is a good thing. I'm using it precisely in the sense that free speech will be restricted, democracy will be suspended, all sorts of rights will be curtailed. It ain't going to be a pleasant situation, and we shouldn't view it as some sort of step in the direction of proletarian socialism. This is the capitalist class's alternative to proletarian socialism. So though it's got elements of state control, we shouldn't have any illusions that this represents some higher form of civilization. Okay. So to illustrate the point, I just wanted to talk about the Arctic, because, we've had the idea mooted by, I think, the government's former scientific advisor under Blair, Sir David King, that basically looking at these governments, these 195 governments, and they're, the denialists, at least they used to be, in Washington and in Brasilia and in Australia and all the rest of it, that basically they ain't going to do it, that climate change is going to continue. And therefore what you need is engineering, and the idea that, well, how do we preserve the Arctic ice cap? We put a giant cloud over the Arctic for 3 months of the Arctic summer to reflect sunlight back up, to allow water to freeze again and not melt in the summer. Okay, fine and dandy. How you do it technically, I don't know. Is it a feasible project? I don't know. Maybe it will be. But of course, what happens then is the plans that Russia now has afoot to opening up the Arctic to year-round shipping, and the exploitation of mineral resources in the north, in Siberia, and the transport of those mineral resources over the Arctic Ocean from Vladivostok to Murmansk and to St. Petersburg, and of course from Vladivostok to Japan and all the rest of it. Those plans come to an end. And what about Canada? Will Canada go along with that? I don't know. But will Russia? I'm very skeptical. And presumably they have to agree to this cloud. And I just can't see them agreeing to it. And although Putin, I think, will pay lip service, or his representatives will pay lip service to the danger of global warming in Glasgow, will they really go along with geoengineering? Will they really be enthusiasts, in terms of actually refreezing the Arctic Ocean? I'm at least skeptical. It's possible, but I'm skeptical. Okay. So my basic proposition is that capitalism seems to me to be the perfect system if you had to invent it, if you wanted to prevent runaway global warming. Capitalism is your perfect system. It's divided, at an atomic level between firms. It's divided at the level of states. It's predicated, as I've argued, on endless expansion. So although it's not automatic that they won't do anything, there's a good chance that they won't do enough early enough to make any decisive difference. That's a real danger, and something to be genuinely fearful of, and to give a sense to give us a sense of urgency. So hence, and I think quite rightly, various people have talked about not only the danger of the intervention of the military and the rollback of democracy, because capitalism won't look to the capitalist paying for the measures. It will be looking for the likes of you and me, because what they'll claim is that the Anthropocene is the product of human activity, and we're humans, and workers are just as guilty of producing this rise in CO2 and methane levels as the capitalists. So we should all pay for it, and we'd be expected to pay with it higher prices, lower living standards, less democratic rights. Who knows? Either way, that they wouldn't want the main burden falling on capital. Okay. What's the time? Sure, I've gone on far too long. Yeah, I've gone on too long. So I'm going to come to an end. I wanted to speak quite a lot more, but I think I've done an hour, and I should only do another 5 minutes. Okay, very quickly then. There is a constant danger of protest being incorporated either by existing governments or future governments on the basis that, Extinction Rebellion, who are they calling to act? They're calling for governments to act, and therefore they're very recruitable to precisely call it whatever you will: military socialism, eco-fascism, eco-authoritarianism. Yes, yes, yes. On the other hand, just looking at the advertising or the little poster that we did for this talk, I just looked at the SWP's poster that they're carrying around, and they say, one solution revolution. I agree, except nowhere in the world do we stand on the cusp of proletarian revolution. The working class isn't organized anywhere in the world into a party, let alone with a realistic possibility of coming to power on a global scale. So hence our stress on the necessity of raising the minimum program when it comes to climate change. And for the benefit of those that interpret that as minimalist, no, this is the maximum that we can achieve under capitalist conditions. This is the minimum, this is the maximum that we can achieve. So very quickly, what do we call for? What do we call for the organization of the working class around? We call for leaving behind power generation from coal, gas, oil, and nuclear. We can come if you want to debate that one. We talk about the demand to reorganize work and where people live. We question the whole commuter culture. We favor public transport. We favor going beyond carbon neutrality. So we favor measures such as rewilding. We favor measures in terms of altering farming. We are for the nationalization of the land. We're for nationalization of the waterways, electricity, transport. We're against geoengineering because since 1850, we've been doing geoengineering, okay, unconsciously, and look at what has happened. We don't know what the consequences, and nor does Sir David King, of putting a white cloud over the Arctic would be. And we look forward to a genuine Anthropocene where human beings live in balance with nature and, yes, learn to master the laws of nature to the benefit of humanity and to the enrichment of nature. But what we don't want, and I don't think is particularly helpful, except when it comes to science fiction, is writing cookbooks for the future, i.e. this is how the future will work. I've got no sympathy myself for, what do they call it? Fully automated luxury communism. To me, that's a call for the working class to emulate Richard Branson. And to me, the idea of everyone going up into near space and everyone having their own private island strikes me as a wacky idea. No, we need to recognize that communist abundance isn't just about material things. It's also about our relationships, one with the other. And it's the richness of our humanity that is the prime task of communism. That's it. Thank you.